What I'd like to do, though, please, is introduce General James F. Amos, the Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps. General Amos. Good. That's right. And I'll leave while they're still clapping. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, those are, Phil, thanks. Those were my kind of opening remarks. I couldn't help but notice this room must be full of retired admirals and generals, because you couldn't herd you in here to save anything here. It's like herding cats trying to get you in here. I am acutely aware that I'm the only thing that stands between you and Secretary of the Navy's happy hour. His cocktail reception, strategic forum reception. You'll be landing here shortly. It's good to see some of my brothers from the Pentagon. They've managed to escape the centrifugal pull of that wonderful institution and building. It's still there. It hasn't moved. So have no fear. Phil, I want to say thank you for putting me here at the very end of a day, the last speaker. That's always an impressive place to be. It is worse right after lunch when you are dozing out there, and I know you did. But I'm glad to be here. General Conway and I do split duty often as we try to work all the things that require his presence predominantly, and I fill in as the executive officer of the Marine Corps. I fill in as often as he wants me to, and I enjoy it. It's been a couple of years since I've been up here. I always love coming back up to this part of the world. I took the liberty of going over the program, looking at the speakers. I know Gary Ruffhead was up here this morning. I got a debrief on what CNO had to say. I got to listen to the very last part of the last panel and listen to some of the remarks there. I'm not going to disappoint you. I'm a Marine. I'm going to bring you down from the 50,000-foot level, maybe down to a little bit more visceral, a little more a gutty, grist-filled discussion here on where we see the Marine Corps over the next 2 decades. And I think it's important. I think it's something you'd be interested in. But before I do that, I need to kind of comment about this thing on order and disorder that you've been discussing for the last in and out for today. I think we're tending towards the latter. In fact, I'm pretty confident that I think the world will be in great disorder over the next 2 decades. And I'd like to take a couple of minutes to tell you why. A decade ago, I moved to Washington, D.C., after spending 2 years as the Deputy Commander of NATO Striking Forces, Southern Europe, NATO Command in Naples, and as the Deputy Commanding General of Fleet Marine Forces, Europe. During that period of time, that 2 years, I didn't get to go to the Vatican. I didn't goof off in Umbria and Tuscany. I spent most of that time in the Balkans. If you remember, 98 to 99, 2000 was a pretty frisky year for NATO and that portion of the world. And I either lived in the Balkans, or when the air war started, I came back to Naples, and I was the Chief of Staff for Joint Task Force Noble Anvil that conducted the air campaign over Serbia. 2 years later, I left a Europe that I thought I knew very well. It was politically cohesive, highly functional and optimistic. It had recently adopted the euro, and after a slow start, it had overcome the many political, diplomatic, and military challenges of the Balkan Wars in about 10 years of warfare. While still laced with uncertainty, life around the globe was pretty predictable. I arrived in the Pentagon in the summer of 2000 to perform the duties as the assistant deputy commandant for Marine Aviation. I knew what I was supposed to do, and I knew how to do it. I had a sense for airplanes, I had a sense for weapon systems, and the ordnance that they delivered. I understood the world order and our role in keeping it all in one place. I had a nice office on the E-ring. Yep, that's me. They just renovated that part of the E-ring, and I moved in. Had an overview of Arlington Cemetery. I was hoping that would not be prophetic. and overlooked the helicopter pad, so all the helicopter pilots in the audience knew that I got excited every time one landed. On September the 11th, 2001, a lot of what I thought I knew about the future was proven wrong. The world turned upside down for all of us in this audience. It's my office. Came pretty close. I've learned to take it personally. I was in New York City about a year later, and there's a grand patron up there by the name of Arnold Fisher, one of the sons of Zachary Fisher, who founded the Fisher Foundation. I was at a gala function on board the Intrepid. Arnold Fisher stood up in front of thousands of people, and he said, "We will never forgive, nor will we forget." Well, that's kind of the way I felt when I took a look at my office. I never got back in it again. In the years that have passed since, I've served as the Marine Corps' Director of Strategy and Plans. Later, 2 years later, I became the Commanding General of the 3rd Marine Aircraft Wing, and I led its 15,000 Marines and 340 airplanes into Iraq for OIF-1 and back again for OIF-2. I followed that by commanding the 2nd Marine Expeditionary Force and its 50,000 Marines and sailors, and over the following 2 years, I deployed tens of thousands of my Marines and sailors back into Iraq for OIF 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. After that, I became the Commanding General of the Marine Corps Combat Development Command, MCDC, and now I serve as the Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps. While at MCDC, General Conway asked me to sponsor a comprehensive look at the future, and more importantly, to help turn that understanding into a useful vision and strategy for his Marine Corps. The effort in its entirety took well over a year and a half. When we began, we understood that we would probably not get it right, but we sure as heck knew we did not want to get it exactly wrong. Our look at the future went out to 2025. It told us to expect a lot of things, some of which you talked about earlier today, no doubt, many of which you will not be surprised as I talk about them over the next minute or two. The world up to 2025 will have significant population growth. We forecast a population increase of about 30% from 2007. That population growth would be centered on the urban littoral areas. And that growth would be predominantly in developing areas like Asia and Africa, vice Central Europe and the like. Those already developed areas that are there today, that are present today, are aging. Many native ethnic populations are declining, with some being misplaced or displaced by immigrants. The world in 2025 will know a significant scarcity of food and water resources. This will be exacerbated by a movement towards the urbanized areas by a nomadic, almost stateless, borderless, and nationless population. More than half the world's population will live in water-stressed or water-scarce conditions. Potable water in some areas will become as valuable as fossil fuel. Natural disasters, the kind that we have experienced over the last several years between earthquakes, hurricanes, tsunamis, will continue. Man-made disasters will continue to rise, such as we're experiencing in the Gulf of Mexico now with that enormous oil spill. Globalization and everything from economics to politics will only accelerate between now and 2025. Cyber technology will be the engine for this. The gap between the haves and the have-nots will be available for the whole world to view. This will pressurize global tension. Political, ethnic, and religious strife will continue in parts of the world. We're seeing some of it now unfolding before us nightly on television between Israel, Turkey, Iran, the spoiler, over the Gaza Strip. Hybrid challenges and conflicts will continue to evolve, and in some cases, they will surprise us. Our look out to 2025 confirmed what Secretary Gates has been saying for the past 2 years. Despite my almost 4 decades of service and study, I've learned that the future is not one bit linear. In fact, it's quite uncertain. In spite of that uncertainty, let me tell you what I believe that we can hang our hats on. What I believe are reasonably immutable truths for the next 2 decades. First, that significant threats will emerge in the next decade or 2 that we have no clear idea of right now. And when they emerge, we'll be surprised. Next, that significant opportunities will present themselves, including the possibility of partnering in new security systems with nations, in some cases, that don't even exist today, or nations that we have heretofore ignored. I'm equally confident that the maritime environment will become an increasingly more important component of our national security. Take a look at the center eclipse, those red lines you've seen before on many other briefs. Those are the sea highways of our globe where our shipping and our maritime business takes place. We are a maritime nation. We always have been, and we always will be. We should become concerned, however, that we are growing complacent in our appreciation for our nation's global maritime responsibilities, both current and future, having focused almost exclusively on land warfare for the past 9 years. I am equally as convinced that all things are not equally important, nor are they equally affordable. And thus, as our nation resources its future national security, it will be forced to make tough choices between capabilities, capacities, and levels of readiness in and among the services. And finally, I am more convinced than ever before that a balanced Navy Marine Corps team, one that is capable of promptly, effectively, and efficiently conducting operations throughout the entire range of military operations, is critical to the continued prosperity of our nation, and it's essential to the survival of our friends, our allies, and our partners. In the last 4 months, many of you had the opportunity, or for the students here at the War College, perhaps the chore, of plowing your way through the latest quadrennial defense report, the 2010 Naval Operating Concept, which has just been signed by our service chiefs, and now the National Security Strategy that was just released a little over a week ago. Let's take a quick look at what the National Security Strategy and the QDR have to say to the Department of Defense. The National Security Strategy is meant to address many topics to many audiences. It's a broad document. It speaks about relationships. It speaks in general about partnership. It talks about engagement. But it is unambiguous in its intent as it relates to the Department of Defense. The United States remains the only nation able to project and sustain large-scale military operations over extended distances. It has been that way since World War II. As we look in the next 2 decades, we need to do our very best to preserve those capabilities. We maintain superior capabilities to deter and defeat adaptive enemies and to ensure the credibility of security partnerships. The 2010 QDR, being more defense-centric, is logically more oriented on the desired military capabilities, and thus it's more prescriptive in its aims. First aim from the Secretary of Defense was prevail in today's wars, and I will tell you that all 4 service chiefs are squarely behind Secretary Gates. He is absolutely correct. We've got the varsity team on the field. It's the second half, and we absolutely need to prevail and succeed in Afghanistan. Secretary Gates said we need to prevent and deter. We do that through engagement. We need to prepare to defeat adversaries and succeed in a wide range of contingencies. That reads the entire spectrum of operations. And finally, we need to preserve and enhance the all-volunteer force that has so successfully taken care of our nation's will over the last 2 decades. Those of you that have read both these documents might be thinking, you know, I don't recall it mentioning the United States Marine Corps in either of those 2 documents. I think we are specifically mentioned at least a couple of dozen times in the QDR, but this is in a document that is deliberately ecumenical in its approach in dealing with its 4 services. However, reading between the lines, Marines see plenty of work in the future. As the QDR report notes, the types of contingencies that U.S. forces will actually be called upon to conduct in the future will certainly extend beyond the range of the examples in that QDR. Reality is always less clear-cut and less predictable than our planning paradigms. It sounds like the 2 decades that I just described. For this reason, DoD's force planning stresses the importance of fielding forces that are versatile, that can undertake missions across a full range of plausible challenges. Ladies and gentlemen, that sounds like a highly trained, general-purpose force. So the question is, what is the Marine Corps' role during the next 2 uncertain decades? And how important is what we bring and do to our nation's security? The Marine Corps has long provided the nation with a force adept at rapidly and effectively solving complex and nasty, seemingly intractable security challenges. So much so that the phrase, "send in the Marines," connotes both a demand for action and an expectation of success. While the general public may not be aware of all that the Marine Corps is or does in 2010, our fellow citizens display an intuitive understanding that in times of trouble, the Marines stand ready to do whatever has to be done. We are, after all, our nation's insurance policy. Our reputation of no better friend, no worse enemy, has been buoyed in recent years as a result of our undeniable successes in Iraq and our early successes in the Helmand Province and in numerous humanitarian assistance operations around the world. While Marines perform a variety of missions across the range of military operations, 2 are immutable and stand out at the forefront of what we do and what we say, we are. First, as part of a naval team, we assure littoral access by bridging the difficult seam between operations at sea and those operations on land. This is accomplished through a combination of capabilities, ranging from military engagement, to crisis response, to power projection. These capabilities contribute to overcoming geographic, diplomatic, and military challenges to access and assist our nation with its strategic objectives of preventing conflict, protecting national interests, and assuring overseas access. Secondly, we fight what has historically been called our nation's small wars. Such operations require a high degree of adaptability and a willingness to sacrifice and to live hard. We have a long track record, spanning recently from the Anbar province all the way back to the Barbary Wars and the suppression of the slave trade in the early 19th century, of success in solving these complex problems. Scenarios where pure military solutions will not suffice because the complex challenges of the conflict are often a combination of security, economic, and political and social issues. Both of these missions require an exceptional level of readiness. Everybody claims a need for a high level of readiness in the Department of Defense, but readiness is expensive. I would argue that our nation cannot afford, nor is it necessary, to have all its services at this high level. While parochial and self-serving, I believe the Marine Corps has been and remains the force where you get the highest return per readiness dollar invested. In a nutshell, the investment that our nation makes to be able to influence the world and thrive in the 21st century is a Marine Corps that can first engage with our allies forward, not on our turf, but on the turf of nations seeking stability, nations seeking our help, forging the partnerships that promote diplomatic access, reassuring allies and friends of our commitment, building partner capacity and facilitating a collective approach to maintaining the security and the stability of our allies. Second, the Marine Corps is a force that can respond effectively to contain disruptions to global security, to overcome physical challenges to access posed by distance, geography, and insufficient infrastructure by coming from a sea base, thus reinforcing U.S. credibility, solidifying relationships with international partners, and forging new ones. Finally, a force that can project power, one that complements a naval and national strike capability with a force that can not only punish an adversary, but one that can validly impose our nation's will by seizing or denying something deemed critical by an intractable enemy. A force that seamlessly transitions between maritime and land domains. A force that supports the rapid introduction of joint, multinational, or other governmental resources into an area of operations, thus enabling the joint force to go anywhere to solve problems, protect U.S. citizens and interests, and when necessary, to defeat our adversaries. The great thing about a forum such as this today is that most here today have a deeply intuitive understanding and appreciation for the linkages between strategy and capabilities. Let me tidy the battlefield up here just a bit and reiterate a few critical points as I close my remarks and prepare for your questions. Although stated in different ways by different administrations, U.S. strategy since World War II has sought to sustain, enhance, and expand a durable international system. Maritime connections are critical links in that international system, and sea power is critical to maintaining and sustaining them. Both sea control and sea power, both sea control and power projection capabilities are essential aspects of sea power. The ultimate value of sea power is that it allows us to influence events on land where people live, where social interaction occurs, where opinions are formed and political decisions are made without stepping heavily on sovereign foreign soil. America's sea power, specifically the Navy and the Marine Corps, are the ultimate guarantor of this international system that's so vital to our nation's national security. Finally, strategy and our nation's security will merge this summer with the reality of the budget process. I would offer that the disorder that we see today and the world we anticipate operating in the next 2 decades necessitates that we continue to make our investment in sea control and power projection capabilities. Investing in naval forces, the Navy and the Marine Corps are our nation's most ready and credible insurance policy. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'll be prepared to take any questions you might have. Thank you.